Just like to welcome everyone to the William H. Hannon Library's luxurious Wanderer suite. The sun is cooperating and is sitting down just nicely in the background. We were worried about it a few minutes ago, so yay for that. My name is Lynn Mitchell Parrish, formerly of ITS, now in the One Card office, just making a comedy tour of all administrative places. I'm coming to the library next, guys. So yeah, it could happen. Hey, that was a great noise. Do that again, please. Thank you so much. This is going to be a good show. Okay, so with this, tell me who here is here for the first time. This is your first LMU Speaks. Okay. All right, so we get a sense of the following and the marketing all at the same time. So we're doing good. So you guys are in for a treat. This is a really cool event. You get a chance to get to know our community members a little bit better as they tell the stories that only they can tell. Right? I don't know if any of you are familiar with the moth storytelling, right? So basically Carol Raby, who I believe is here tonight, there she is. Yeah. She came back from a moth event and basically grabbed the first person that she saw and said, we have to do this at LMU. We have to. And essentially just did not physically release that person until promises were made that this was going to happen. Like, I don't even know if that guy worked in the library. It's just something that's just Carol doing it. That's just Carol making it happen. Oh, is that you? Okay. All right. I don't even work in the library and I'm here every year because Carol said so. So yeah, so it's thank you, Carol. But for those of you who aren't familiar with the format, essentially we give all of our speakers a prompt, and usually it's just to guide their stories. It's often like life's going to throw you a curveball and tell us about a time when that happened and how did you handle it. I was lucky enough to be in the first LMU Speaks way back in 2017. I don't know if y'all remember that time, but so it's called The Fork in the Road. And that just kind of gives you a sense, right? You're coming up on something, you make a decision, your life is different. So that's it, the fork in the road, and then it was off the rails. And now here we are at this year's prompt, which is, as I was saying, because we felt like there might have been an interruption in some kind of conversation that was happening due to some event. I don't really know. So anyway, it's just a suggestion, though. Really, it's for the storyteller to take that suggestion any direction they want to. So you may see the whole gamut: comedy, tragedy, a mix in between. Don't be surprised. But also, as an audience member, you need to take care of yourself too. So laugh when you feel like laughing, cry with us when you feel like crying. But also, if something's overwhelming, triggering, anything like that, just please feel free, step out. This is the kind of event where that's not going to be disruptive in any way. It's totally fine. Grab some air and come back in. But just know that you take care of you and the stories will continue. Fun fact, the LMU Speaks event has been proven to be pandemic proof. And I don't know if you guys remember, like a couple of years ago, we had like a pandemic, and it's still fresh. You guys remember that? Okay. Yeah, that's true. But we snuck it in. Like February 2020, we had it in a couple of weeks later. Everything flipped, turned upside down. Zoom meetings became mandatory, and pants became optional, which was kind of fun. Yeah, seriously. Honestly, you know who you are too, because as soon as you're like, okay, wait, that Zoom frame is just like I'm going to the office Winnie the Pooh style the whole rest of the time here. That's just gonna happen. Again, you know who you are. But as I was saying, so 2020, we snuck it in. 2021, we weren't quite back in person yet, but we did it online. We had number 5 online, and 2022 we were back. 2023, everyone else was back, but COVID got me. I felt bad I didn't get in anything, but it was Valentine's Day too. It was really sweet. And now here we are, 2024. So I feel like we're going strong, and we're going to do well. And with that, I want to officially welcome everyone here to the 8th annual LMU Speaks, as I was saying. Thank you. So we have 5 speakers tonight, so I'm going to get going, right? So our first speaker is a third-year honor student from BCLA. Please welcome Citlali Garcia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Citlali Garcia. I am currently a junior here at LMU, double majoring in economics and environmental studies. And before COVID, or pre-2020, I was actually a junior in high school. When I read the prompt for this year's LMU Speaks, asking about what I want to revisit and the things we should have never left behind, I thought, oh, easy, my prom. Now, I understand that there are many other established adults in this lineup whose work and life were significantly uprooted by the disruption of the pandemic. But obviously, none of that compares to the complete devastation of an American teenage girl who did not get any prom experience. For the record, that was a joke. But I didn't completely understand that back then. At the time, my world was shattering. So much so that I didn't realize the earth around me was literally on fire. I'm a dramatic person. I understand that about myself, and so are teenagers. Just in case you don't remember what it was like being a teenager, let me remind you. It was awful. Having to reflect on my pre-COVID years made me physically cringe, but it also helped me realize how much I've truly changed. Back then, my energy and priorities were all in the wrong places. I cared so much about what everyone else thought of me that it completely clouded my judgment. All of my self-worth was established out of the validation I got from external sources. The way I survived was by making all my decisions on the basis of others. I had a voice. I was saying things, but I was only saying what everyone wanted to hear. Now, upon further reflection, I found that I wasn't always like that. In fact, I was a rather confident, extroverted, and secure kid. I sang, I acted. My family told me I was filled with spunk. In elementary school, I was the loud little Mexican girl in class who could never understand when to stop talking. And when they switched up my table, I'd just make a new friend. There was no doubt that my light shone bright as a star, because it was written in my name. Citlali Garcia. Citlali meaning star in the Nahuatl language from which it originates. I was simply being me, a Citlali. However, growing up, I quickly realized it was a problem for others. I started receiving different signals on how to fit in or how to reduce my personality to make it more palatable. I sensed that my pride was met with objection. I, a girl who was taught to say goodbye to her family by shouting, "Power to the people," was disrupting the status quo. But societal norms continued to protest my uniqueness in hopes of dimming my light. They went after its source. They went after my name. The power of cultural assimilation is a mighty one, let me tell you. The more I went to school, the more I made white friends and had white teachers who always needed a reminder on how to say my name. Citlali, I would tell them time and time again until they wore me down and I gave in. My name, once meaning star and lighting up the world around me, suddenly became Sit Lolly, which I can only imagine is a lollipop found stuck to the bottom of a seat. 8 out of 10 times after this initial interaction, people asked if I had a nickname or if I go by something else. Even just saying my name was too uncomfortable of an ask that they hoped for something that would make their lives easier at the expense of my being. I didn't understand this at the time. I was just a kid, but whether I knew it or not, these messages stayed with me. I became insecure about who I was. I became insecure about my name. And I was only happy so long as everyone else around me approved of my presence. Instead of being loud and proud, I quickly became quiet and observant. I observed my peers in school and work settings and listened to the remarks they made about the world that they viewed around them. And I found it very troublesome. I couldn't comprehend how at school the people I surrounded myself with spoke so lightheartedly about unjust current events, but at home my family was heartbroken over political rhetoric that was damaging our communities. Back then, I followed the majority, which meant I conformed. I stayed silent. I shook off the politics, and shown no light of mine over social injustices, just as my friends did. Besides, there were far more important things to talk about, such as who liked who and what we were all going to wear to prom, you know, standard stuff. But I let it engulf me until it became all of who I was. Then March 2020 came around and something happened that shifted everything. Here at LMU, we tend to talk about St. Ignatius of Loyola a lot for obvious reasons. To summarize for those who don't know his story, he was a frivolous soldier addicted to women, gambling, and violence that got hit by a cannonball and was bedridden for several weeks. While in bed, he had a lot of time to ponder and reevaluate what he was doing with his life, which ultimately ended in him not only becoming a follower of Christ, but also creating the Society of Jesus and thus forming the Jesuits. Here we like to call it his cannonball moment, and love to ask people on campus, what's your cannonball moment? Well, folks, COVID-19 was me getting hit with a cannonball. Hard. As we all were forced into quarantine, suddenly the very fragile foundation of my identity, built by external validation, collapsed underneath me. And for the first time, I understood that this way of living was unsustainable. Seeking comfort in others was unsustainable. And everything I had tried so hard to bury down resurfaced. I could no longer hide from all the guilt, shame, and self-hatred I had. And I was left alone to grapple with these feelings, and it was hard. It was a very painful and very ugly experience because of how much I resisted the change. Slowly, I opened my eyes to the unjust systems that surrounded me and saw the earth burning. I was left alone to grapple with and process not only the uncomfortable truths about myself, but about the world around me. Suddenly, prom wasn't the most important problem anymore. I grew. My perspectives changed, and I started to acknowledge my social responsibility to this world. Now, I'm very fortunate enough to not have experienced any loss during that time. And I count my blessings every day because what I got instead was a gift of transformation, a rebirth. So what I'm working on revisiting now, and what the pandemic helped me realize I lost, is fostering that little Citlali's light and reminding myself that I am important, I am worthy of love, and it is okay for me to take up space. Thank you. But reclaiming my light wasn't just about embracing who I am. It was about challenging the narratives that sought to diminish my presence in the first place. For me, it was a reckoning of the privileges I once took for granted, the injustices I once overlooked, and the power dynamics I once perpetuated. It was a call to action, a call to amplify the voices of those marginalized and stand in solidarity with communities long ignored and oppressed. So now I am on a mission to fulfill the prophecy of my name, shine like a Citlali, and help illuminate the injustices that for too long have been left in the dark. Thank you.
That's right. Keep it going. Thank you very much. And very nice. And this is why we do this, so we get to hear these stories. Our next speaker is a filmmaker studying with the School of Film and Television. Please welcome Brandon McKinney.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say I'm so blessed to be here. My name is Brandon McKinney. I'm a junior film production major and business administration minor. This past year, I joined the Intercultural Facilitators to facilitate dialogues on important cultural conversations. But in all honesty, I'm best found on your local LMU film set. Now, let me introduce you to the Brandon of 6 years ago. In the long lens sense, for you non-film majors, that means, in a nutshell, I was a shy child whose voice was strongest within the pages of his journal. I was an inquisitive child whose parents would say, "Don't go over there." And I interpret their warning as an opportunity to go on an adventure and explore. In the wide lens sense, there were many things people never got to see. They never got to see the struggles I had growing up in my household. They never got to see the quiet kid in the back of the class, afraid of his own voice. They never got to see the power that I gave others over myself. Going into high school, I found myself in unfamiliar territory. I was entering a new school for the first time. In my first year, I was placed within the Riken program, a program tailored for highly motivated students with mild learning differences. You see, I had recently been diagnosed with ADD and ADHD, and my parents thought that this program would be the best chance for me to succeed in this new environment. Despite the importance of the program, I knew this was not something that I wanted to do. I felt capable of taking on the challenge of the high school curriculum and was excited to go on a new adventure. But I didn't have a choice. My parents had already made their decision. I'd be joining this program in the fall. Unbeknownst to me and them, their decision would lead me down one of the most grueling and life-changing paths that I could have ever imagined. The stigma behind the Riken program was suffocating because we were all seen as students with no potential. Every day felt like hell. Starting off in a new school, and the one thing I wanted more than anything else was to feel grounded. But it's hard to do that when everyone has set a limit on my personal success. I was bullied every day and looked at as less than. Can you imagine what that type of experience does to a young, developing mind? It was debilitating, and I hated every second of it. I even began to join in and belittle myself, constantly telling myself that they were right. I was a hopeless case. My life was a joke to everyone else, and all I felt I could do was smile. I was tired of being me. But as long as my friends didn't find out, I thought that everything would still be okay. But ultimately, I knew that was a pipe dream. I couldn't keep my life a secret from those who I love. One day, I was studying with one of my good friends, and I accidentally revealed to him that I was a part of the Riken program. He looked at me and laughed directly in my face. I stared back at him as if every fear I ever had been realized in a single moment. I was frozen in embarrassment. In that moment, I told myself, I can't do this anymore. I was tired of the jokes, the fear, the words that were constantly used to demean me. I knew I was more than what people had reduced me to, and my anger pushed me to look for an escape route. It was at that moment that I decided to join the IB program, one of the most rigorous educational paths my school had to offer. However, before I could join, I had to talk to my academic advisor, who was a part of the Riken program. He looked me over and my straight A's and said, "I don't think you'll succeed here." That was the last straw. I was going to do this because I wanted the ability to choose my own path. Despite all the voices telling me that this is something I shouldn't do, I knew I was ready to do what I'd always done: go on an adventure. The new program was definitely going to be challenging, but nothing was more challenging than what I've already experienced. My life literally changed overnight. The jokes, the laughter, the embarrassment all ceased. I was relieved. I was free. Realizing my own agency and earning a spot in a program that so many doubted I belonged in, I found hope. I discovered a community that embraced me for who I am, a group of individuals focused on growth and achievement. That's when the pandemic hit. completely disrupting the negativity that I'd begun to adopt. The negative voices that I'd once used as fuel for my passion held no power over online learning. I became unmotivated and lethargic. It was like I finally made it out of hell and the whole world decided to go to it. The external voices that had troubled me for so long may have been gone, but the scars that they left made me realize that I'd been living life not based off my own agency, but solely based and constricted by the opinions of others. My happiness was dependent on what others felt about me. Why should other people determine my happiness? They shouldn't. My happiness and the choices I make are defined by me. So then my goal became not completing the IBRU program for the people who thought I couldn't, but for myself. I was finally doing this for Brandon. And that's what I struggle with today, continuing to do things for Brandon in every situation that I enter into. To be honest, after everything I've just said, that is the most challenging experience, to continue to know who you are no matter what happens. Life is filled with challenges and moments of internal and external doubt. But through it all, I emerged stronger and more resilient because I believed in who I am. Who I am is more than just a word or a program. Who I am is intricately detailed and infinitely beautiful. So to any of you who may be struggling or may feel trapped, you are capable of greatness. You are worthy of success, and no one can tell you different. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, keep it going. Yeah. Thank you, Brendan. Okay, our next speaker is the Senior Vice President of Student Affairs. Please welcome Kawana Leggett.
As I was saying, why did I agree to go in the middle after the amazing students? All right, so I am older, and so I need notes. These students are amazing. I stand before you as a storyteller, tasked with sharing a tale that embodies the essence of LMU Speaks. And the theme, as I was saying, is pretty important because I'm going to lose my track a couple of times. And so every time I do that, say, as you were saying, okay? But this allows me to delve into a story and allows me to paint a picture of what LMU Speaks represents. So for me, this is my first time at LMU Speaks. LMU Speaks is more than just an annual event. It's a celebration of the human experience, a testament to the power of storytelling, a platform where voices from our diverse community are amplified and honored. It's a space where laughter, tears intermingle, where we can be vulnerable and embrace our connections. And both stories resonated with me, particularly around names. There are not a lot of Kawanas on presidential cabinets. Every week I get an email with my name misspelled. My name is in my email address. And so let me start telling you a tale. So as I was saying, I can't wait to graduate high school and start college. It begins in a small town, and I always describe my town as a one-stop like town, but I actually want to describe it a little bit more for you all. And if you have your phone, feel free to Google Rowland, North Carolina, Rowland. The poverty rate in 2021 was 25%. The median income household was $30,000. And so my one-stop like town is more than just a one-stop like town. The largest ethnic populations are Black, 60%, white, 23%, American Indian, 15%. So when I went to college and I realized that, wait, where are my Native American friends? They don't exist. I'm in this one-stop like town in North Carolina thinking that's what the world looks like. And so as I was saying, as a wide-eyed teenager, I remember dreaming of the day I would bid farewell to this familiar intersection and embark on my journey for college. It was a dream filled with anticipation, excitement, and a hint of nervousness. I imagined the adventures that awaited me beyond the confines of my hometown. I thought the goal was always to get out of that hometown. And so I began my college journey, and I want to talk about the power of a work-study job. So as I was saying, COVID meant nothing to me when I've already had so many bumps and bruises. I started my journey as a first-year work-study student in the housing office. And I remember seeing people walk in the housing office angry. This is my first day at work. Everybody's angry. They're like, I want a room change. I'm like, what is wrong with everyone? Why is it like, chill out, it's our first day of school. I'm just trying to get by day. And they would go into the office of the staff and they would come out cheery and happy. And I was like, what is the magic happening in this room? Well, who are these people? And I realized they were student affairs professionals. And so as I navigated my first year in college, I found myself navigating a whirlwind of experiences, from late night study sessions, newfound friendships, moments of self-discovery, and unexpected challenges. The road of higher education was not smooth. There were a lot of detours and roadblocks. My first semester, I had a 1.75 GPA. And I paused and said, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. And you hear a lot of people talking about imposter syndrome. I will say I don't have imposter syndrome. I always feel like I'm supposed to be spaces. But that 1.75 GPA shook me. And it was the first time I realized you can't just skate by like you've been doing. You have to take things serious. And you have to ask for help. That's the thing I wasn't doing, asking for help. And so I began to ask for help from some of the same resources we have on campus, the Academic Resource Center. I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to do typical things that I should have known how to do at that level. And so I had to take on resources. And so as I began to ask for help, and as I began to immerse myself in my work experience, I began to understand that the demands of having a part-time job, managing a financial aid situation that was ever changing, and many of the challenges that most college students didn't have that I was around. I realized that it was more than just asking for help. It was understanding that my journey was going to be a bit different. And so the second semester, I got myself together and I got a 3.8 GPA. And I realized I can do this. I just got to get some resources for myself. And so this is a testament of really having a dedication and where I discovered my passion in higher education. And it fueled my pursuit to actually begin to empower other students. And so I became the traditional path, being an RA, a peer health educator, orientation ambassador, what all good students leaders do. You get overwhelmed with all the opportunities. So I got involved in everything. But in the midst of this, I found myself trying to be relentless in what was the next step of my journey. And I decided that I was going to get my political science degree, but I wanted to advance my degree and go to graduate school. And so as I was saying, turns out I navigated a lot of twists and turns. People were still misspelling my name back then as well. And I discovered that there was a thread in all the elements that I enjoyed: helping people, learning, and putting my all in pouring into others. And so I decided to go to graduate school and began my new path professional journey in student affairs. So with this newfound purpose driving me forward, I embarked on the next chapter of my journey, venturing into the University of Arkansas for graduate school. Here I delved in the deep intrusive nature of bureaucracy and higher education. And realizing I'm not a student anymore. Even though I was a graduate student, I was learning that even this great tool of higher ed has its problems, its structural challenges. it's a system set up that is not equitable and not fair to everyone. And I began to ask deeper questions about what was my role in making change. And so I began to hone my skills and expand my horizons. But my journey did not end there. From the hills of Arkansas, I found myself continuing to ask myself, how can I do better? And I actually got my master's degree, worked a year, and went back to Clemson to serve my alma mater. How many people are alums of LMU? The power of going back to your alma mater and making change, it's hard, it's tough. It's not like your undergrad or graduate experience, but it helps you in so many ways. So I went back to Clemson and I served as an advisor in student organizations that made me who I was. And then I realized, okay, Kawana, you've been in the South all your life. You still have this accent that you can kind of hear off and on, which I love. But you need something different. And so I made the journey to go up north, and I worked at the school called the College of New Jersey. And then I took myself to New York City. I remember being on my interview and terrified to get on the subway. I'm still from a one-stop-like town. And the person who is now one of my greatest friends, she was interviewing me and she said, just get on the subway. And she explained it. And I realized in that moment, this is the place I need to be to continue to push and challenge myself. And so I embarked on a new adventure at New York University, where I immersed myself with the rich tapestry of student life, traveling to Shanghai and spending the summer there, working with NYU global programs, continuing to push myself to create a more supportive and inclusive environment for students from all walks of life. For NYU, my journey took me across the country to the campus of UC Berkeley. And I always say, if you can survive Berkeley, you can survive anything. And so pandemic aside, if you can survive Berkeley, you can survive any place. Here I spearheaded initiatives to enhance student residential programming, building relationships to build community and build trust of students. If you can get a UC Berkeley student to trust you, again, you have made it. But perhaps the most transformative chapter of my journey was at Washington University in St. Louis. Who leaves California to go to St. Louis? I did. At the time, it was right after Michael Brown. It was a time where I knew my purpose was to build community, that community in a place that had been harmed, in a community in a world that had been harmed. So I made the decision. I assumed the role of executive director of residential life. And fast forward, I become the dean of students during COVID and associate vice chancellor, navigating the problematic tensions in the world of navigating a global pandemic in a city that was already still reeling in pain. So I aimed at enhancing the student experience, both online and offline, and becoming a true leader that listened to people. WashU has a mantra, getting to know people by their name and story. Not just what they can do for you or what you can do for them. Tell me who you are. What's your journey? What's your name? And what's your story? Reflecting on my journey from the one-stop-like town to the bustling campus of LMU, I'm reminded of conversations I want to revisit, the threads that I want to pick up, and the things that I shouldn't have left behind. My story is a testament of the transformative power of education, the resilience of a human spirit, the importance of staying true to yourself no matter what, no matter how many times people mispronounce your name, no matter how many times people ask you, what is your role and what do you do? I'm honored to continue my journey at LMU. I'm honored that these students have shared their story and they inspire me every day. My role gives me a sense of purpose and passion, and I work tirelessly to create supportive and empowering communities for students. As I reflect on the chapters of my journey from Clemson to LMU, I'm reminded about the power of community. So I thank you for allowing me to share my journey. I love talking about Clemson. I love talking about the roads that led me here, but it was not always easy. Again, I'm still that first year student that got a 1.75 and my mom was screaming at me on the other end of the So thank you all so much, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is a BCLA faculty member in African American Studies. Please welcome Michaela Bethune.
Dr. Leggett, what was that you said? As you were saying, I'm also old. And so I also will be somewhat relying on some notes, but really just to kind of keep me focused. Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, the ancestral, the unceded territory of the Tongva and Gabrielino Indigenous people. For centuries, as we all know, the Tongva and Gabrielino people have experienced the traumas of genocide, rape, murder, assimilation, erasure of culture and language, displacement, kidnapping, resettlement, and so many other abuses. I acknowledge not only the land that we get to learn, work, and have conversations like this on, but I also want to acknowledge Indigenous people who are still alive today, the thousands of people who are still stewards and residents of this land, and for whom this land is still so very important. I feel the need to say this acknowledgement, especially as for this beautiful, breathtaking view that we have of the bluff. We have a beautiful Tongva memorial, a space of residence, one of the only spaces of residence on campus. But we have the space for memorialization. We have the acknowledgements of land, but we don't have the people. And we sit in comfort all the time with statements of acknowledgement. So I'll take the time. I also want to acknowledge my African ancestors, give them reverence. The Mende people who are of the present day area of Sierra Leone, my African ancestors who resided in America, who were stolen people, and who were enslaved, put in barracoons on the coast of West Africa, brought over the Middle Passage across the African apartheid, forcibly resettled onto this stolen land. I want to extend gratitude for their resistance, their joys, their conflict, their shortcomings, their overcomings, their resilience, their joy, their love. And most importantly, for them to create a radical, revolutionary vision that included a life for me. I'm thankful to them. My ancestors would eventually share in the stewarding and cultivating of this stolen land and the effort to build this nation. And so I just want to acknowledge not only their labor, but their spirits. I want to acknowledge my African elders, my elders whose whispers and prayers and whose walk and whose inspiration and patience and love have also held me in my life in this realm. The elders are those who have given me the wisdom and guidance and gems and the inspiration and authority to even speak today. And so I thank them as well. All right, let me catch my breath. I am Michaela. I am the daughter of Cassandra and McGahee. I am the mother of Sean, Ian, and Cole. You know, I know it seems like a lot to give all of this acknowledgement. It seems performative at times. And for some it is, but I just wanted to take that moment. And with all that my ancestors have fought to achieve, all that they have overcome, it is the absolute very least that I can do. For others, it is the most that they have done. Wait, what was I saying? What are we here to talk about? Is it 2020, y'all? Do we have to go back to 2020 vision? Oh, gosh. For a minute there, it was looking good. Oh, man, we had our vision boards made. It was a new decade. You know, I don't know, for anybody who lived through the Y2K bug situation and all of that fear and frenzy, 2020 just seemed like the perfect time to refocus our vision to have a sense of clarity about what it is that we were going to chart in terms of a path towards the future. Okay, but for me, I'll tell this personal story. Just a few months prior, after 9 long years in a PhD program at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, I had defended my dissertation, finally seeing the end of this road of being a broke grad student. I was completing applications to try to get a job, and things were just feeling so much lighter. I was so excited to turn the corner into a new decade. And so this stark transition from the graduate school struggle was this top of 2020 that seemed very pregnant with possibility. Right around the time that I connected with LMU for my first round of interviews, what began to emerge would change the world as we know it. I'll just let y'all in on a little bit of my nerddom. Okay, on my breaks from drafting application materials, y'all, I was one of those folks in January 2020 scouring the internet, looking at all of the international global health journals to try to get to know this new anomaly of a disease. Okay, I'll let y'all know, international global health journals did it way better than US-based journals. It was riveting. You had this disease, you had this virus, the coronavirus. Okay. And in these early articles, we were finding this fascinating information. This disease induced this deadly impact. Okay. I used fascinating very lightly early on, but again, it was new science. It induced this deadly disease, the coronavirus disease. And this was studied in 2019, hence COVID-19, the coronavirus disease 19. By January the 31st, though, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services had declared this new anomaly of a disease as a serious public health threat, a serious public health emergency. I'm going to go ahead and let y'all know, as a researcher doing health-focused stuff, of all people, I was cynical. I was like, uh-oh, here we go. Another January, okay, in an even year. It's time to have another global pandemic, okay? First, we had things like the swine flu. Y'all remember that during an election year? We had bird flu, another election year. And we can't forget about the couple of handfuls of people who contracted Ebola during an election year, okay? And so we were put into this frenzy, and then we had these moments that were highly politicized. This is what I expected of the COVID-19 virus. I figured, just like many of us or many people in the news media, that this would just be something that would blow over in just a couple of weeks, okay? However, just sort of thinking about the virality of the disease, I thought it would subside in news media and then subsequently diminish in our collective consciousness and become just something we used to talk about. Remember that old thing back in the day, that time where we were stressing about COVID, okay? At the time where we were contact tracing and the number of COVID cases were in the dozens in a state, we actually had more COVID restrictions than we do now that millions of people have died. Okay, there were things like quarantine, stay-at-home orders, mandates for masking. And so I was still in the state of Tennessee, and on March 3rd is the day that the first confirmed COVID case in the state of Tennessee had been publicized. You all have to understand, at that moment, all of the cynicism that I had just melted away. All of a sudden, the threat and the possibility, the crisis possibility of this moment finally hit home. But before I could fully complete my inhale and move into an exhale, even more devastation hit us in Tennessee. On March the 5th, just a couple days after confirming our first case of COVID, the most deadly tornado that the state of Tennessee had seen in a decade touched down. Dozens of my friends were impacted, homes were leveled, and 25 people died. Amidst this devastation, there was just chaos and confusion. Do we mask up as we do disaster relief? What is a safe distance to be able to help rebuild a neighbor's home? Nothing was the same anymore. There was no precedent for how we would move and breathe through this moment. I watched as school systems and public institutions mandated closing. In March 2020, the state of Tennessee mandated all of its public schools be closed. All of a sudden, I'm looking at my 3 children and saying, I don't know, it's me and you in this house. And guess what? I was still broke. But even as we were facing all of this transition, these pivots that we made to remote learning, remote teaching, remote work, stay at home orders, okay, there was still more devastation still yet to come. On May 25th, 2020, a Black man was lynched. At least this is how I experienced the headlines. I refused to watch the video. There's no need. I can redact the viewing and consuming of this media from my life and still know for sure what has happened. A Black man was lynched. Lynching being a state-sanctioned act and public spectacle. Millions and millions or more of people around the world watched as ancestor George Floyd died, was murdered after a police officer, who I will not name, kneeled on his neck. All of a sudden, this headline commuted me to all of the other lynching stories. Breonna Taylor, Eric Gardner, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. 2014, I can't breathe. 2020, I can't fucking breathe. I can't fucking breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. 16 times George Floyd said, I can't breathe in the 17 minutes where it was documented that he had a knee on his neck. 17 minutes until his life was extinguished and a pulse was no longer available. 17 minutes until ancestor George Floyd's spirit was returned to the ancestors. As a mother of 3 future Black men, I was commuted to distress, to anguish, the same anguish that had tormented me for decades of my adult life. And still we are here, not being able to breathe. And then, not having watched the video, but just having read the news, I see the other lines. My neck hurts, my back hurts, everything hurts. As a mother, I'm trained to be responsive to that. And then finally, we see George Floyd's last words. Please, mama. And so in 2024, I find myself having a different relationship with breath. During the COVID pandemic, alongside racial upset and uprising, which now we can call syndemic, we are moved to a space of having to evaluate what it means to have breath. Breath has become politicized. Do you put a mask on? Is it an N95? How do you vote, whether you like mask or not? But to me, hearing these words or seeing or reading these words of George Floyd as his life fled his body, it reminded me that breath is life. Breath is life. Breath is an opportunity to live different. After the year 2021 or 2020, we watched institutions around the world rush to this call of consciousness around racial injustice. Not only were institutions challenged to think very critically about racial injustice in the world, institutions moved to a space of self-evaluation, of self-reflection. What are we doing about racial injustice? Here at LMU, we codified a mission around diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism into a 5-year strategic mission. Not only is anti-racism a part of our strategic mission, it is one of our core commitments. Expressly, LMU looks like a wonderful institution. But I can't sit here and pretend like LMU has not since followed the trend that we now see happening across the country. We see anti-intellectualism, institutions very fearful of standing behind their express stated commitments around diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. With policy changes, we see DEI offices, roles, and curricula rolled back. We see attacks on critical race theory, which is law school theory that is purported to be taught to kindergartners. I'm telling you, I'd watch the fight to attack it if it actually existed in kindergarten, but it doesn't. And so we see institutions walking back their commitments. I was very happy to see this codification of commitment into the strategic mission of this institution. However, soon after, I saw this institution hemorrhage my Black colleagues. One by one, my Black colleagues had to leave. There wasn't enough money. The climate was not supportive. All of the work of the institution's DEIA initiative was falling on me and my Black colleagues. All of a sudden, my classes are waitlisted in African American Studies. Huh? At LMU? Okay. And so when I say, what are we doing with our breath? I'm not talking about the lip service. I'm not saying, what are we talking about doing? What I'm saying is, what are we doing with Ashe? What are we doing with that which breath restores and supplies us with, which is vitality and capacity to be able to do something different, to be able to do what we already say we do. So I closed my very first instantiation with LMU Speaks with what I have been saying since I've been at this institution. What are we doing with our breath? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our last speaker tonight, in addition to being a colleague, is a really dear friend of mine. She works as a senior director in information technology services. Is that how you say it? Okay, very good. So please welcome everybody, Krista Kopp.
I don't know how I'm going to follow that. That was amazing. But I think there's a little bit of a thread here in talking about breath, and I hope you'll be able to pick up on that. 25 years ago, my older brother disappeared from the house that he lived at with me. He lived with my ex-husband and I, and he vanished. Didn't take his phone, but took his gun. He didn't show up to work, didn't show up to college classes that he was in. We called him all day long, and for about 16 hours, he was missing. He left a suicide note on his bed that I found that morning. When he finally did come home, I hit him as hard as I could, which he said felt like nothing, but and then I hugged him as hard as I could, and we cried and we talked, and he promised to never do that again. A couple weeks later, I wrote a poem about that, and I want to start with that poem. And oddly enough, as the universe would have it, I found this poem in a book, in a box, just a few weeks ago, so I could share it with you today. The tables have turned. I see a little boy protecting his sister, in his heart, promising to shield her. Never saying he really cared, sweet words were never shared. Running children, laughing at life, not knowing pain or understanding strife. Tears were easy to wipe away then, and a broken heart was simple to mend. A little girl envied her brother's ways, looking to him for the right things to say. But now the tables have turned. Through the years, what was learned? Those children grew up to be the adults in you and me. But my childhood promise remains the same. This stubborn soul refuses to be tame. My love doesn't stay in a memory, but goes on through eternity. I see a little girl down on her knees, thanking God for her family, praying blessings from above, always trying to show them love. A tear falls on a pillow at night. Something wakes her with fright. The thought of losing her brother is a pain greater than any other. And now the tables have turned. Through the years, what was learned? Those children grew up to be the adults in you and me. The little girl in me still bows to pray upon those sacred vows. And the heart that breaks is still my own. If only you knew you weren't alone. My love doesn't stay in a memory. My brother, it grows to set you free. So you see, 25 years ago, I wrote those words. I shared those to him. I spoke those words. We talked all of the time. And then life happened. We both got married. We both got divorced. We both got married a second time to people who were oddly worse than the first time. We both had kids. We both got really involved in our jobs. Life happened. And we stopped saying those words. Danny was 2.5 years older than me. He was athletic. He was quiet, very quiet, painfully quiet, but brilliantly smart. He could fix anything. He was the kid you would take the toaster oven to and say, can you just make that work? He restored totaled cars as part of his living. He would, I drove this amazing MR2 that had been totaled, that he had put back together. It was the coolest car ever, which then I again also totaled again. He was the guy who pulled the 4-wheel ATV off of me after I had buried it in the sand dune and it pinned me. He was the guy who used a screwdriver to alleviate the pain from his wisdom teeth coming in. He was the guy who cut his cast off when he thought his arm was ready for it because he had broke it in ice hockey. Danny needed no help. He was the guy who could do anything, and I could take any actual problem to him. And this is why I have notes. Danny was the guy who introduced me to 80s British pop. And for those of you in this room who know me, I love 80s British pop. So whether that's a good or a bad thing, we can have that debate later. But Danny loved our little brothers more than anything possible. He spoiled them rotten. He was 13 and 16 years older than our little brothers. And those boys could do no wrong. He took that same love in loving his own 2 boys. He was a dad who loved adventures with his boys and loved to do things with them. But we didn't talk about anything real. And when the pandemic hit, as many of the stories that we've just heard, when the pandemic hit, we stopped talking even more. I didn't even see him for over a year through the pandemic, even though he lived less than an hour away. Our conversations became less and less. We stopped speaking. We stopped saying the things we needed to say. Two years and 29 days ago, Danny took out a handgun and shot himself in the head. 2 years and 29 days ago, his life ended, and mine will never be the same. His blood alcohol level was what they call in the stupor range, 0.285. That meant he had 10 glasses of alcohol within the last hour of his life. So he probably would have ended up in a coma or passed out or something else just from the alcohol. But instead, he decided to actually use a gun to end his life. What I didn't know was that he drank every morning. What I didn't know was that his coworkers saw him shaking every night. What I didn't know was that he still had active guns in his house. What I didn't know was how much pain he was in every single day. But I do know what that phone call was like from the sheriff. I do know where I was at as the rain was falling on me when I had to tell my parents that their eldest son died. What I do know what it was like to clean up the aftermath from Danny's death. As I was saying, I don't know why we stopped speaking, but I know I stopped saying what needed to be said. And I know he stopped speaking, and I stopped listening to the silence. And while I know I'm not at fault, therapy is very good for this. I know it's not my fault. And there's not one thing that one person, one individual can do. It's a collective ignorance and a collective inaction that our society has towards people who need help. Did you know that 50,000 people in the US commit suicide every year? 700,000 worldwide. And out of those 50,000, 30% of those have alcohol abuse attached to it. And over 50%, 55% use firearms. So while we say we talk about like tough topics, we say that we're willing to talk about these things, and we're willing to talk about gun violence, and we're willing to talk about alcoholism, and we're willing to talk about mental health, yet 50,000 people in the US every year don't. And 50,000 families had to go through and are going through what my family went through. So we don't talk about it like we should. In the county of Los Angeles, when there is a murder, the coroner's office cleans it up. They bring biohazard crews and they actually clean it up. Self-inflicted injuries, they do not. After standing in the rain for hours outside of my brother's house, the coroner, the animal control who had to drag his dog out of the house, the sheriffs, the cops, neighbors. The sheriff turns to me and hands me a pamphlet and says, there are resources in there that can help you clean this up, and walks away. I went into the house that night and sat for an hour, not sure what to do, but went back to my own home, and my parents met me there. And we decided we would go back the next morning and assess what needed to happen. My dad and I approached the bedroom where my brother had took his own life. And I stood in the hallway like a centurion, like I was going to keep somebody from barging in. And my father walks into that room. And he stands there for what seemed like an eternity. It was probably about a minute. And he turns to me with tears in his eyes and he says, I have to do this. And I knew that my father's final act for my brother was to make sure that the rest of his life was cleaned up properly, because my brother would never want anybody to see him as anything less than perfect. And I also knew that I wasn't going to let my dad do it alone. In processing this trauma and a few other traumas that happened in the last couple of years, I began to write again, which is oddly why I found that poem. But I began to really process his death through my word. And so I'd like to share with you one more poem. And this is an abbreviated version of this poem, but this is what I wrote after the autopsy report showed up. The manila envelope arrived unannounced, waited 8 months for this return label, and an internal debate ensued. The practical side said this is not the time to open. The emotional side said this is absolutely the time to open. The envelope was opened. 10 pages filled with gruesome details. Murder mysteries do not prepare one for an autopsy. Demographics and evidence start the description. Graphic exact measurements, angles and pain, toxicology numbers, and line drawings. Facts no one should see about a sibling. Examining the parallels of our lives, the inability for us to take care of ourselves. From the grave, the message was on these pages. A warning, a cautionary tale of the end. The painful screaming of unattended suffering. How self-care is not optional, but imperative. The manila envelope arrived unannounced. Its contents were unnerving and unwelcome. Its impact was unexpected and unconscionable. Its message was uneasy and heavy. Its message was unleashed on me, and its message I understood. The message that my brother wants me to share with you is that, as we were saying, we might not ever get to say it again. And so, as we've heard throughout all of these stories tonight, take the moment now to say the things you need to say, and take the moment now to reach out to people who are suffering. Thank you.